Welcome back to the My Latin Life podcast. Since 2014, My Latin Life has been your trusted guide to traveling and living in Latin America. Today, we have a highly anticipated episode, the Nicaragua Roundtable, the latest in our, series of Roundtable episodes. We've done Mexico, we've done Argentina, we've done El Salvador, I think a few others. And what we try to do is bring together a group of esteemed country-specific enthusiasts. In this case, we have our Nicaragua experts, and they're going to help us kind of go behind the scenes on this country that is, I think it's one that the reputation and the reality on the ground are the most out of line compared to, say, other countries in Latin America. And we're going to learn a ton more. So I'll introduce our guests. We have Scott Allen Miller, YouTuber. We have Patrick Hiebert, real estate developer. We have Jack Pitman, also a Nicaragua YouTuber, and we have Don Jorge, a Twitter X personality.
Hey guys.
So maybe we'll go around the circle and just give a quick 30-second-ish introduction person to person. So Scott, do you want to kick things off?
Sure. So I'm Scott Allen Miller. I first moved to Nicaragua 9 years ago, but have been living here 3 years continuous since we made it really our home base. I'm originally a technology and business consultant from the U.S., and after moving to Nicaragua, found that I was very passionate about the country and living here, and kind of fell into being a YouTuber, accidentally covering the space pretty extensively.
Awesome. Patrick?
Hey, I'm Patrick Hiebert. I own a company called Eco Villages. We develop communities throughout the region, Latin America and the Caribbean. Have communities in Belize, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, expanding into Costa Rica, Mexico, Argentina, etc. And basically creating freedom-oriented, self-sufficiency-oriented communities. And I became a Nicaraguan resident, I guess about 11 years ago or something like that. And one of the first communities that we developed was a smaller one called Milagro Verde. It was in Nicaragua, and that's kind of where we cut our teeth and started and got to know about real estate in the area, and got to spend a lot of time. Lived in Nicaragua for many years. At the moment, I live in a number of different countries because of where our communities are, but still always love spending the time that I can in Nicaragua.
Yeah, absolutely. Jack?
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I wasn't able to get my camera working properly. Otherwise, I would be showing my cheerful.
No, it's all right. So, for the audience, by the way, we can see each other, but we're only recording audio. So, Jack, you're totally good.
Okay, awesome. We're on the same page then. That's fantastic. Well, for me, I haven't. You see, a lot of you have lived out your lives more than I have, and I don't really know what I've done necessarily as much. But I can tell you that I lived in many places around the world growing up for the first 30 years of my life. I was in mostly the United States, but it started off in Sri Lanka, in Lesotho, in Africa, and in various other countries that are very different. And my teenage years were filled out in the United States. But I saw and experienced a lot of things that made me feel motivated to put it all away and leave. And I had my eyes on Thailand, but then at one point got a chance to visit Nicaragua, and that set the dominoes in effects. And I'm here 6 years later, and I couldn't imagine living somewhere else. And that's why I'm here. I've made YouTube videos about this experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. 6 years is decent. That's a solid amount.
I think I'm exaggerating, but it's probably a bit more than 5, because I first visited 6 years ago, but I don't remember exactly.
We'll round up. And yeah. Let me introduce our last guest here, Mr. Don Jorge.
Hey guys, yeah, I'm Don Jorge, I guess on Twitter. I've been in Nicaragua about 3 years or so. Came down during kind of the peak of the pandemic as a Canadian, and on vacation. Now I'm still here 3 years later.
Epic. 3 years, that's good. So the person, I guess for the audience, with the least amount of time in Nicaragua on this episode is 3 years, which is great. Because, sometimes you get people who only have 1 year or whatever, but 3 years, you're definitely in the rhythm. You know what I mean by that point.
Well, 3 years, but I've been over a course of 9. I've had an office here continuously for 8 years, so it's 3 years seems low.
Yeah. So we'll crack into our first topic, and the one I wanted to touch upon first was safety, because to an American, Nicaragua probably sounds a little bit scary. It sounds rough, but people might be surprised to find out that Nicaragua is one of the safest countries in the Americas, probably safer than the USA at this point, right? Maybe you guys could talk a little bit about that, starting with, let's say, Jack, because he's in Managua, I believe.
Yeah, I guess for people that's sketchy sometimes, right? That hasn't been my experience, and even though I've lived in a couple different places in Managua, but most foreigners won't even really go to Managua, so I won't go too much into it. But I can say that in Managua there are sketchy places, and there's also paradise. Like that's been my experience. There's areas that are truly, genuinely just peaceful and calm. And there are also cheap areas that are crowded, but they're not sketchy. Then there's also other areas where like people get robbed regularly, and that sort of thing. So it's all about understanding that whatever you've heard is just something you've heard. If it's true, it's about an experience. And there's millions of experience being had by all the people here every single day. So you can't let just one thing that's heard dominate all of the experience, right? And for me personally, I've personally never gotten like robbed or been in a situation. I've lived with people they've behaved in a way that someone came in and stole $20, an ice cream guy. But aside from that, when things have gotten stolen, it's because people leave something out on the street. It vanishes very quickly, this sort of thing. And what happens is the moment you go away, that's when the stuff gets stolen. But if you're willing to be around all the time, it's quite unlikely that you're going to have to deal with something like that. But it really depends on where you are. My experience being someone who lives and works in the house and goes out to buy groceries, and I walk and I don't have a car. I mean, people know what I'm doing. I'm recognized where I live. I don't get robbed. I also don't have a house. I don't live in a house. It's very obvious in the front, and when you leave things in the front, like if you put a potted plant in your street, it's going to get taken. And if you have like a fancy kind of animal that's really valuable, someone might steal it. That kind of thing happens, to be brutally honest with you. But aside from that, my experience has been one of safety. Keep in mind, I live in Managua, and I live like within sight of one of the perimeters. So it is different here. People, even locals, they don't behave the same way because there's like a lot of police centered around here. There's like, in order for me to go to where I get food or Super Express or something, I'll pass like 3 or 4 sentries, and like I recognize some of them because they shift out a lot, right? But they don't like they treat me well. They and I don't mean like they treat me any differently. Like I'm just a person walking by. It's not like some big problem. My experience living in Managua is one of convenience, one of being able to get anything that I can imagine delivered to my door by someone on a motorcycle. And I never had access to enough land to cultivate and grow things and be around plants and have chickens. And I couldn't do this in my life before. I didn't have enough money. So I lived like, I had more money than other people here, especially, but in the US, I would rent a room, that kind of thing. I didn't have access to land or anything like that. It was a very secluded experience. I didn't get the richness that I get to experience here in my life. So for me, safety-wise, I haven't had any issues. But people get robbed. That's what happens. Realistically, that's the thing that happens. There's tons of things we could go into that people think will happen to you, but that's the thing that does happen. If you put something out in the obvious or out in the open, or you're in a very touristy area especially, people will steal things that'll shock you that they even stole them in the first place. Like that is how it is. And that's not unique to Nicaragua. That's unique to anywhere in the world where there is the travel of privileged people around people who genuinely aren't as privileged. And I don't mean they don't have access to the same education and this kind of stuff, I mean, like the things they have to put up with, the crowdedness and the abuse in some people's families, and the things that in the West we spread them out. And here they don't have that choice. They have to live with that every day of their lives, and it's important to always keep this in mind as one is here, because it is so beneficial for us. But if we're not careful, it can come at the expense of the very people who make it beneficial to us. So I don't mean to bring this up too often, but I like to talk about that aspect of it, because I feel that it is neglected. When we talk about our safety here, we're kind of missing a bit of the point because our ancestors made this land unsafe. I'm from the US, and I'm descended from like the beneficiaries of people who earn money from this sort of thing. And I feel very, there's that frustration knowing that my life here is good. But we have to be so careful that we're not messing things up for others. And I just bring this up because really we should be thinking how people are really, what's their security like. Because if you're able to be around others, locals who are secure, you are secure. And the security doesn't come from knowing something. It comes from having enough of a bond and interactions with people that you're not really ever alone. So no one gets their chance to mess with you in a sense. When we fixate on our own individual security, we sometimes have a tendency to make these things happen. But really, what matters here is you won't get robbed if people can see, for the most part, unless you're in a market. But the moment you leave your house, it might get robbed, even if it's just for a weekend or something like that. You need eyes on property to prevent that from happening, and you need to pay and treat people well so that they aren't easily enticed to do otherwise. Otherwise, things can happen.
Let me put it to Patrick. You talk about property in the city. Maybe what about property out in the country, Patrick? Because I know your properties are kind of like out there beside a volcano or something, on the Pacific coast. So what's it like in the countryside?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the dichotomy between mainstream media and the North America's perception of safety in Nicaragua and the reality of safety in Nicaragua are maybe the furthest apart of all the countries in Latin America. And when I came down, I think 2003 was the first time I was in Nicaragua, and then got my residency and lived there for many years. But my kids, who are now in their 20s, were just toddlers at the time. And I never, I did a lot of research before I came down to Nicaragua. And at the time, it was the safest country other than Canada in all of the Americas, with that. And it hasn't changed much. El Salvador surpassed it for the first time this last year. Good for El Salvador. It didn't mean that Nicaragua got more dangerous. It just got El Salvador went on this amazingly positive thing with Bukele. And
got knocked to number 2.
Yeah,
Nicaragua.
Yeah, I got not well in Central America. It's number 2 now, but people, it's just kind of crazy. And I could go into the history of Nicaragua and the Iran Contras and all the things that caused the perception of Nicaragua to be bad, and confiscating land, which wasn't really confiscated. It was taken away from people that took it anyway. So it's there's a lot of history to it, that perception. But I think one of the things that Nicaragua did smarter than any of the other countries in the area is in the 80s, they developed basically what is the equivalent of North American neighborhood watch. And there was that combined. So it was kind of like it takes a village to raise a family. They sort of made the whole villages watch out for everybody else. And that together with a make work project of making everybody a police officer, it's like your brother, your cousin, your sister, everybody is a cop in Nicaragua, it seems. Especially if you're driving down the road and crossing a solid yellow line, you'll start feeling like everybody's a cop because you're always getting pulled over. But it's perfectly safe. And those two things, the neighborhood watch and the actual sheer number of police officers in the country, basically stop the gangs from developing. I mean, I'm not saying it's 100% gang free. There is some, but the problems that Honduras had and El Salvador had originally with gangs never really materialized in Nicaragua. And that kept, and I don't look at the theft as much of a big deal. If you leave a nice camera equipment on the beach or something in just about any country, it's going to go away. But, so for me, I look at the homicide, records, and in Nicaragua, I think at this point, I haven't looked in the last few months, but probably around 7 out of 100,000 people.
6.2.
What's that?
6.2, just past the U.S. at 6.3.
Okay, perfect. So it's in that, and it's always been kind of 4 to 7 range. It's as long as I've known. So that then if you so first of all, you can't compare an entire country necessarily. Just like it's not fair to say, what's Chicago versus or St. Louis versus some nice little Midwest hometown type of thing. You can't really do that in Nicaragua either. So like you said, our communities are built generally on the beach. We have security in them. It's almost more for show than for reality, but it's not like living in Managua necessarily. And like Jack said, there's parts of Managua that are very nice as well. And so in general, you're safer, in those countries. And my daughters, when they were teenagers, would drive around the country on their own, and, they get a flat tire and the people would pour out of the woodwork and help them change a tire, and away they go. I felt safer with them there than in the big cities in North America. So, that's kind of, and like I said, I've been coming down to the area for over 20 years now. And, of course, I've had minor things go on, but nothing serious. And, I could tell you a story. I don't want to take up all the time. I could tell you stories where the actual opposite has happened. Well, very quick story. A guy that was very grumpy about Nicaragua and how it was a terrible place to be. And I tried to, say, well, why is that? We went out for lunch and he literally left his camera on the beach, really expensive camera equipment, camera bag full of stuff. Totally forgot about it. We left, and then he remembered the next morning. And we went back there to the little restaurant that was beside where we were sitting. And he was like, oh, these people have taken it for sure. And I said, well, probably, yeah, but let's check. And sure enough, somebody had brought it into the restaurant, and the restaurant put it all in the back, the room, and brought it out. And then as we were leaving, we all were very thankful and everything, but he was still being, I'm surprised it was there. And it's like, kind of just not a kind of guy you want to hang out with. But then we started driving away in the van we were in, and the waitress comes running down the street after us. And I look in the rearview mirror, and she's out of breath when she gets to the truck. And he says, oh, here it comes. She wants a big tip or something. And it's like, I don't think so. And we roll down the window, and she says, oh, you forgot your cap this time. All right. So that was the experience. That was a fairly typical experience that I've had in Nicaragua. So it's not always sunshine and roses, but it's like anywhere else in the world. You've got to be smart about where you go at the right time in big cities, and that's about it, right? So otherwise, the stats support the fact that it's one of the safest places around.
Oh, Vance, we lost you.
Now I can't hear you now, Vance.
Oh, sorry, just unmute there. I know Scott's been itching. He came in with that 6.2. He wants to talk about this.
Yeah.
I was just interviewed about the safety numbers. So yeah, Nicaragua is one of the reasons that we like living here with kids and having businesses here and operating from here is that it is so safe. I'm out all the time. So there's two things. One thing that I think is really important, and I used to live in Eastern Europe, and when I would live there, one of the things that I learned was that they didn't consider safety the same as Americans do. When I grew up in the U.S., when someone said that place isn't safe, what they meant was you would be at risk of a violent assault, right? Murder, mugging, something that involves a weapon or bodily harm. That is our concept of danger. If you leave your camera on the beach, that's not considered safety by American standards. In Eastern Europe, I lived in Romania, and when visiting other countries, people would be like, it's really dangerous. You have to lock your car when you leave it. And you're like, that's what you call dangerous? That people will try your door handle if you leave it unlocked? Like, okay, that's unfortunate, but yeah, I assume I have to lock things. And I get the same reaction to a lesser degree in Nicaragua, that I'll be walking in what people call really dangerous neighborhoods, and they'll stop me. And I'm walking alone. I'm kind of distracted. I'm a YouTuber. I'm holding a camera. It's clearly a real camera. Like it's noticeable that I'm holding gear, and people will stop me like, it's really dangerous. And I'm like, what's going to happen? And they're like, someone could run by and grab your camera. I'm like, okay, I totally understand the risk of someone grabbing my camera. That's not danger in our context. No one has ever said to me, that's dangerous, something could come as bodily harm to you. Now, when I lived here 9 years ago, I did have some spots where it was sketchier back then, I think, a little bit. And some people were like, this is a bad neighborhood. You shouldn't go here alone in the middle of the night, in the dark, like real extreme. I'd be like, oh, okay, maybe I'm being foolish. I can't read the situation. Now that never happens. I go out. I'm in Barrio Venezuela. I'm in Villa Libertad. I'm in San Judas in Managua, and like there's never anything to worry about. And here in Leon, we're really fortunate. We're generally considered the safest city in Nicaragua. So here, they actually had to put out a warning that tourists were getting so confident in how safe it was that they would get drunk and wander the streets at night alone, very, very vulnerable. And they're like, you got to stop doing this. Like, you're inviting crime. But it really is a surprisingly safe place. And I'm getting, this is very time sensitive, as this happened last night. There's starting to be quotes from Canada that there's people fleeing Canada to come to Nicaragua specifically. And while that may be an overblown statement, I am doing interviews today of Canadians specifically who have come to Nicaragua because of I literally talk to 3 to 4 Canadian families per day.
Yeah, we tweeted about this yesterday.
Yeah. And I talked to so many Canadians, and they keep saying that safety has dropped so much. I don't believe that it's actually more dangerous than Nicaragua, but they're starting to believe so. Of course, their perspective is that it's been so safe and now it's less safe. So little bits of crime make Canadians feel like it's really bad. But the perception is really changing that Nicaragua may be really approaching Canada in safety, still behind El Salvador, unfortunately, as Patrick pointed out, but we'll catch them. They're not getting away with this.
So safety related, sorry to cut you off, Scott.
No, go ahead.
There's an active chat here actually where people are talking about how common Canadian expats are in Nicaragua. And I guess this is somewhat related to safety, but anyway, what do you guys see more? Canadian expats, American expats? What's the split? I'll put it to Don Jorge first to talk about what kind of expats he's seeing in Nicaragua.
It's a good question. I really think it would depend on where you are, right? Like there are certain areas where there are like kind of high concentration of Americans, and there's certain areas where there might be a higher concentration of Canadians, but it could even be seasonal. It could be, sometimes in San Juan del Sur, I might spend a day and meet a bunch of Canadians. A month later, I might only meet Americans. So like it would be really hard for me to judge. But personally, I do interact with a lot of Canadians just through some of the communities I'm involved in. And
2 to 1 Canadian to American.
I would say it could be 2 to 1, and I'm seeing it day to day because I'm in these groups and I see they're kind of exploding, especially the ones like specifically involving Canadians and those types of Facebook groups and stuff. And I see the interest. It's not just because Pierre interviewed that lady. Like it was happening before that, and maybe it'll be a little uptick on Canadians who probably never even knew what Nicaragua was. So, I have a Nica wife, right? And I told her, Nicaragua got mentioned on the Canadian news. She's like, what? Canada got Nicaragua on the Canadian news, right? So she was excited about that. But yeah, and I've also been to certain beach areas. I'd say Las Penitas, which is, it's not the most popular beach here, but it's like probably the second or third most popular. There's a really good mix of Europeans. Actually, I think it's mostly Europeans, then Canadians, and then there's a lot of Americans down there too. And then San Juan del Sur would be a good mix of both. Then you go to a place like, say, Hacienda Iguana, which is more like an exclusive country club golf community. And I would say it's more upper scale people that probably came down from Costa Rica, a lot of Nicaraguans, and definitely less Canadians. And then in Managua, not too many expats here at all. It might just be me and Jack.
Okay, so you guys are both in Managua.
Yeah.
You guys hang
Mostly.
out?
No, but I'm sure we'll connect after this.
Yeah, we
Do
should
it
get
up.
coffee at some point.
Epic. Anyone want to weigh in on just, the expats they're seeing? I know Patrick's Canadian, or just, anyone who wants
Yeah,
to jump
well,
in.
I mean, we have a pretty good perspective because we have a database of about 140, 150,000 people that follow our communities. And I would say, well, I could make a lot of comments on this, but percentage wise, with a country with 30 some million people versus 330 million or whatever US to Canada, percentage wise, there's, quite a few more Canadians. And a lot of that changed, that demographics and age changed, a lot of different types of things. The demographics changed due to COVID. Nicaragua got a reputation, in my mind, it depends how you feel about this, but in my mind, a good reputation by saying, we're not going to make you wear masks. I mean, some businesses did, and many businesses did, but the government didn't. We're not going to shut down the economy. We're not going to do all this. We're not going to force, vaccines and things like that. And regardless of how you feel about that thing, that stuff, the freedom-oriented side of people really, really like that. I mean, it was kind of Nicaragua and Sweden in the beginning. And then Sweden kind of capitulated and went, just kidding, we'll get in line. And Nicaragua never really did. And so that really made, I mean, for our stake, we saw a lot of people. Like at one point I was looking at our stats internally, and it was, about a 3,000%, 30 times increase in the number of Canadians interested in residency in Nicaragua. And so, as Vance, we put together a package for agroforestry and that to help those people that are looking for residency. But it was, a big change. Like, creating communities right now as we are in Panama and, going into Costa Rica, Belize, every place is getting a boost, right? It's an exodus out of not just Canada and the US, but of, Europe, Netherlands, Germany, a lot of countries. France was having farmer issues. Anytime things blow up, they look for other places where they'd rather live. Australia was huge because of their COVID response. We got a strange number of New Zealanders last few months. So it's like all these countries are getting, inundated with people from all over the world, which I think is great. We had 10 people here at Veritas in our village in Panama coming in the last couple of weeks, and not a single one of them was from the same country. So I think that's great. And you're coming in and you're sitting watching the sunset with a glass of wine or a beer, or in Nicaragua, Toña. It's nice to be able to talk to people that are, somewhat like-minded and travel, adventurous, and, but from all over the globe. Right. So to me, it's a great thing.
So Scott, let me ask you a question. What is El Simple?
Oh, the Simple Beach Lodge, commonly known as El Simple in the area, is the host of the Tuesday Booze Day, which is like Sunday Fun Day in San Juan del Sur, but it is a Tuesday night party on Las Penitas, but it's similar. And for those who don't know, San Juan del Sur, there's a truck that takes people around to the really big party that's so famous down there. And in Las Penitas and León, which is a bit different because we have a city right there with the beaches. It's unique in Nicaragua that there's a city with city beaches. So there's actually like chicken buses, like big, huge buses that load up at the big hostels in downtown León. And then at night, they take people out. They actually start at the volcanoes during the day, then the hostels, they get wasted in the city. Then they go to the beach and party all night. And the last time I was in San Juan del Sur, the Sunday Fun Day is a fraction of the size of the Tuesday Booze Day. Now, it's the last time I saw it was 3 buses bringing people down to the beach on a Tuesday. So
3 buses on a Tuesday.
Surprising. Yeah, it's a surprising number of people.
And strangely enough, 3 buses are missing their workers on Wednesday morning.
Right. Yes. And a lot of hostels are missing their residents on Wednesday morning. It's a bit of a mess. Just to jump in real quick with the Canadians versus Americans thing, the expat showdown. My personal view is when you're looking at tourists, travelers, backpackers, when you're looking at the travelers, I see a huge mix. Lots, especially out here, lots of Swiss, German, Danish, Norse, like Irish. You're getting tons of those regions, plus Americans and Canadians. But when you see people becoming expats, when you see them actually immigrating to Nicaragua, my view is that we're even in this region, which we lean very heavily to Central Europe for travel, we still see an incredible number of Canadians compared to Americans and Australians, which seem to be the second tier groups. And I've said this a lot. For Americans, there is a ton of don't go to Nicaragua, but there is a ton of go to Mexico, go to Panama, go to Costa Rica, go to. So all those countries have a tendency to get loads of Americans. And Americans are generally pushed away from Nicaragua. This is just American advertising, right? Canadians are nearby and generally want to avoid large groups of Americans. So if you take a place nearby to Canada and naturally eliminate a certain number of Americans, so even though there's a lot of Americans here, it is a American deficit compared to all neighboring countries. And I think that, and it sounds funny, but I really do believe that effect is like the Canadian vacuum. Canadians are like, finally, it's nearby. It is a place that Americans should want to go to, but for some reason don't. And it's their one chance to go someplace and not be just lost in a sea of Americans. And I think that actually subconsciously, I don't think people are very often making that a conscious choice, but they're very often just, I don't know what it is about this place, but it's not like Costa Rica because Costa Rica is full of Americans.
Well, we have Cuba as well.
There's Scott too. I think one of the things is Costa Rica almost feels like a 51st state sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
And Nicaragua is much more authentic and wild, or whatever you'd want to call it, Wild West. But I think the other thing too is a lot of people look at the U.S. State Department website and they're always warning about travel in Nicaragua. You know, I don't know how many times a week we get asked as a company. It's like, is it safe to go there? It says all over the State Department website that you shouldn't go there. And it's like, yeah, so Canadians don't necessarily, A, look at that, and B, wouldn't follow it if they did. So, you know, I think that dissuades a lot of people in the States from coming down to Nicaragua.
Oh, yeah.
Hey guys, quick break from the podcast to tell you about job stacking. If you're a remote or hybrid worker looking to maximize your earning potential, then Rolf Haltze, author of Job Stacking, guarantees you'll be able to double your income by implementing his paycheck multiplication layering method. This is the exact system Rolf has used to take his own income and those of many others beyond $20K a month. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, if you're interested in unleashing your earning potential and doubling your income, then click the link in the description and book a call with Rolf right now. Hey guys, quick break from the episode to tell you about BitRefill. BitRefill allows you to shop online and in person without banks, converting your crypto directly into merchant balance. We're talking gift cards to Nike, Amazon, Apple, Airbnb, Hotels.com, and many more, all paid for with crypto. BitRefill offers more than 10,000 gift card options in 180 countries all across Latin America, including Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, El Salvador, and many more. You can also apply the code MyLatinLife at checkout to get 10% back on your first purchase. Go to bitrefill.com for more information.
The U.S. puts in a real effort to convince people not to come here.
Yeah.
So when I would talk to people, and I noticed there were a lot of Canadians, I didn't necessarily talk to a lot of people who are really far in the process. The people who I would do calls with are usually people who are trying to learn more about Nicaragua, but when they actually want to like get residency and do everything more, that's not part of the process that I'm like. I focused on the introduction basically and being like, okay, I'm here, I'm still here. Like it's a way of showing like, okay, I'm having this life. I must believe in something, basically, right? But the reason I say this is because I talked to people who were interested in leaving sort of and looking at Nicaragua early on in the process. Maybe people who've never even visited. Many cases, they never visited. And I can say that it's like Scott said, there's a vacuum of Americans, whereas there's Europeans, there's Canadians, there's other Latin Americans, there's people from neighboring countries. But there's also sort of a Costa Rican vacuum here, too. It's kind of interesting that way. Whereas there's loads of Nicaraguans, like local Nicaraguans, in Costa Rica. So they sort of went that way. And that's sort of the line, the Americanized line, so to speak. And it's very different there. The city, when I was there, I can just say this about the safety, and then I'll mention the thing about the Canadian thing. I used to hang out with, I would skateboard, and I would hang out with the skaters. And the experience of walking the streets with a group of skaters when you're holding a skateboard compared to walking around as a lone foreigner, you just like blend in. Like people don't care about you. You literally just can see things differently. And in Managua, the skaters are chill. Like really, they're super chill for the most part. I'm not saying they don't have problems, but you could literally just be a skater, go to some random people who skate in the street, and like you don't have to be afraid of them mugging you or something like that. Or like for the most part. But in San Jose, in Costa Rica, oh, it's a totally different experience there. The skater culture, like when I went there, multiple people were like, never have cash, ever have cash, ever. They were very insistent. It was obvious that they had personal experiences, and none of the skaters had cash. And I witnessed 3 or 4 skaters just get strip searched at the park in front of me by other like police, just in that 1 or 2 weekends I went there over the years, compared to my experience in Managua, where like that stuff sounds insane from the perspective here. It's so much different in that sense. There are issues here, but there's less militancy here. You don't see that militant edge, right? But with the Canadians, I never meant to imply that there are a lot of Canadians here already. I was implying, at least personally, that of the people who were looking at leaving over the past 2 or 3 years, there was a new pattern in when I did more calls, the kinds of clients that would show up. Before it was usually individuals, maybe people who had a family, but there were 2 separate Canadian families who showed up to the call, like the mom, the dad, their 3 kids in the background. Like it shocked me. I'd never seen that before. And that had only happened twice with Canadians. I don't know. They weren't related to each other. And that's only 2 instances. But in all the other calls, it's not like there were thousands of calls, but I probably did like 100 or 200. There's like times where you notice the patterns of the different people who are at least talking to me from the YouTube content I make, right, which is going to bias them. It wouldn't be whole families showing up. That was weird. It was definitely like, I was like, what? So that's the only reason I made that comment earlier, not to drag things out.
I think one of the other things too is countries like Costa Rica, Mexico, several of the other countries in Latin America had billion-dollar budgets in their advertising of tourism into the U.S. Even starting in the 70s and 80s. Right? I mean, Costa Rica is probably 40 years ahead of Nicaragua in terms of advertising. What a great place to go visit. And so, I think Americans tend to pay. Well, first of all, they were advertising to Americans, not so much to Canadians, and Canadians were kind of looking for themselves. I know even when I was growing up, I knew about Jamaica because Jamaica was the only country that was advertising in Canada and Belize, actually, that, here's a good place to go. So a lot of Canadians ended up going to Jamaica. So they learned about something from their TV commercials and they wanted to go there. And I think, Costa Rica did that. Mexico did that with Americans, not so much with Canadians. I mean, they do now too, but Canadians tend to be just, you got to go find your own places that you want to go, and they'll do their Google research and discover Nicaragua. I mean, I guess that's how I found it. So, I was going to travel with my kids, like I mentioned earlier, that are young, and I was like, well, what's a safe Latin American country to go to? And immediately Nicaragua stats popped up. All right. And then I started talking to people, and they said, yeah, it's like Costa Rica, but more authentic. So it's like, sounds cool.
One surprising thing we talk about on Twitter is that Nicaragua is actually safer than Costa Rica, like significantly so. And people probably don't expect that. Most people would expect Costa Rica would be safer, but actually it's more dangerous and way more expensive, right? So it's kind of like
I've
Maybe.
had so many people shocked about that. With my experiences with backpackers, especially, I like to sometimes, if I go travel around the country, I like to stay in the hostels just to talk to some younger backpackers and stuff, see how their experiences are going. And I've talked to so many that have told me that they got violently robbed on some beach in Costa Rica. And on the flip side, I've never ever heard of any backpacker getting robbed here in Nicaragua. So that's just my little antidote on that.
Mhm.
So I want to jump in because I recently did an episode specifically comparing the safety across Central America, and yeah, I find it odd that there's people who feel that Costa Rica is it's safe enough, right? But that feel that Costa Rica represents some kind of safety because it's a relatively dangerous country compared to the U.S. and Nicaragua are essentially the same. Panama is a little bit more dangerous than Nicaragua, but not in a dramatic way. To give numbers, traditionally when Canada is considered just ridiculously safe, it's like pushing high ones to two violent crimes per 100,000 people. Most of Europe is below one. So that's the safest region in the world for any large area. Canada is kind of European-esque with a little bit of North American violence thrown in. The US and Nicaragua come in at the sixes most times, with 5 to 7 being kind of the range. This is where we consider still safe, but it's not super safe. It's just safe. Panama falls into the border zone of, well, it's about 50% more likely to have violent crime compared to the US or Nicaragua. That's still awfully safe. But Panama's kind of the last country that falls into that zone. Costa Rica falls into the it's slightly dangerous zone. If you're discussing it, the word it's kind of dangerous should be how it's promoted because it's just over 300% the violent crime of the US in Costa Rica, 3 times more likely to experience violent crime in Costa Rica. And one of the things that I think really shows that if you travel, this is actually a great experiment, but don't do it because it's dangerous. No, really, it's not that bad. But if you take the bus from here in Leon, from Managua, take like the Tika bus, take the Nika Expresso, and it goes to, I'd have to look up the bus station, one of the big bus stations in San Jose. And you're going from Managua, right? The pickup in Managua is Los Robles. It is so safe, you can walk the streets middle of the night. You can have cash hanging out of your pockets. Like there is nothing that's ever going to get you in trouble in Los Robles. That's your pickup for the bus in Nicaragua. And when you get to Costa Rica, as the bus starts pulling into the bus station, you're calling people going, please, please, please come pick me up. I don't want to stand outside this bus. It is terrifying as you approach the bus station. It is incredibly dangerous. Taxis won't come get you. They can't go in to drop you off. There's no safe ingress or egress. You are stuck moving through hordes of people, all of whom, some of them are just stuck there. But it has homeless encampments around it. It has refugee camps around the bus stations. It has an unbelievable criminal element. It's crazy. And you have to get blocks away to have a safe zone for loading and unloading from a taxi or something. And of course, there's lots of San Jose that is safe, but just the bus station for tourism into Costa Rica is more dangerous than any barrio I've ever been able to get someone to find for me in Nicaragua. I know of no example in Nicaragua that approaches just going to the bus station in Costa Rica. And it's noticeable. If you fly into Costa Rica, it's a totally different experience. You're surrounded by a more affluent tourism crowd. But once you're going in by bus, which is what a lot of backpackers experience, once you get away from the resorts, Costa Rica leans more towards Cancun, right? Which if you're in a resort in Cancun, it's pretty safe. The moment you're in Cancun, it is a war zone. And so Costa Rica is not quite that bad, but it's pretty bad.
I've heard it's really common for Nicaraguan people to have lived in Costa Rica and come back here or something like that. I know a few cases of that. And from what I can tell, it's usually really about work at the end of the day. Then recently there's been things that have scared a lot of Nicaraguans, so they leave. But ultimately, the thing they're agitated about is work. But people have told me, at least, that in Costa Rica, in the city, it's sort of like how I've described, where it's super intense, and especially in really crowded areas, there's just a level of verticality that doesn't exist in Managua. ever see that concentration of people in Managua. Like people think of Managua and Nicaragua as crowded, but really, relatively, it's not that crowded at all. At least, but when I've looked, I mean, if you compare it to like Los Angeles or New York City or these other places, or even like a place in Asia, some of the cities there are incredibly crowded, right? So for me, it doesn't seem that crowded here. But San Jose is like other cities in that way. But they've told me that in the country, it's more like it is in Nicaragua. That the people aren't, it's not as intense, and things are slower. There isn't that same intensity. And especially if you're in areas where there aren't as much tourism, one of the reasons those criminals can do what they do is because there's enough tourism to sustain them, right? So when you go somewhere that there isn't a lot of tourism there, there's a difference from when you're spending your time in areas that are known for having a lot of tourism, because those are going to be targets. So I I don't I try not to lean so much on the numbers, just because I've seen firsthand here how, okay, like I took a picture of a cactus, seems irrelevant. I put that up online and they're like, whoa, that was in Nicaragua. Holy crap. Wow. I didn't know that was on in Nicaragua. And then I did that a couple more times. And I started realizing that anytime you hear made in Honduras, or only in Honduras, El Salvador, Costa Rica, Mexico, Nicaragua's on that list. People just don't know. There's literally bees, there's species of flowers, plants, everything. And it's just like this gaping hole. We act like, no, those things aren't in Nicaragua. And like, I'm not talking about a rare cactus. I'm talking about they're like these big columnar landscaping cactuses. You see them a lot, like everywhere. They're really common. Like, it's not
Security
something
fences.
yeah, basically, yeah. They're not the super
But
spiky
the
ones.
thing is
But the
that
ones, yeah.
they're the cactus are the security to keep the pigs out of your garden, though, not to keep people out.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just being facetious.
Well, I mean, I found that funny because people said, "Yeah, we use the cactus for security," and it's like, you mean somebody that wants to break into your house, won't go cut a cactus down and just walk through? And he's like, "Oh, it's not for people, it's for pigs." But I find it funny that all the surrounding countries too, like every country, is always putting down the other countries. Like if you're in here, I happen to be in Panama as we're speaking right now, and if I went outside and said, "Hey, I'm going to Nicaragua next week," they'd be, "Oh man, is that safe? Should you do that?" It's like, and then I have to have the same conversation we're having now about Americans or Canadians or whoever, Europeans, thinking that Nicaragua is not safe. Their neighboring countries feel that way too. Costa Ricans are like, "Oh, I don't know if I'd go to Nicaragua. That's not safe." The smart ones go there because their dollar goes a lot further when they're going on vacation. But it's a funny thing. I mean, you could be watching CNN anywhere in the world and get a bad idea of what Nicaragua is.
Well,
If you're watching CNN, of course.
yeah, in there's a park in, well, I saw at least when I was in San Jose. There's whole areas filled with Nicaraguan refugees. Like, just they fled, but they're not there legally. But they're there, and I'm not trying to dismiss anything. Sorry, I'm just saying that specifically in the case of when Costa Ricans are prejudicial or anything against Nicaraguans, they're often having that experience because there's a lot of history of Nicaraguans coming into the country. So Costa Rica has sort of a more Western keep them out experience compared to other Latin American.
They developed a lot faster and they have the jobs, right? I mean, that's the thing that kind of gets frustrating when I watch. Right? Yeah, when I watch the news in North America or whatever, talking about how Hondurans and Nicaraguans and everybody crossing the border, and they're saying, "Oh, it must be so horrible living in those countries that they have to leave." They're actually crossing into a more dangerous zone, and they're not going there for safety. They're going there for jobs. When they see the news and they hear something like a $15 an hour minimum wage, imagine that when your own minimum wage is around $1. Right? So it's the perception of, oh, people are fleeing from Nicaragua because of persecution or something like that. It's like, holy smokes, there's great jobs in the U.S. and my cousin got one and he can have a car and those sorts of things. So it's that whole perception of safety, I think, is is boosted by the fact that, the border crisis that's going on in the U.S. right now and what it's getting blamed on.
Yeah, I know. I personally know a couple of families and people who have left, like to go to try and make it in the U.S. And I can say that it's related to work, and also
Yeah.
that for them, they believe that when they get there, everything will be fine, and they often don't
That's the big thing.
understand just how dangerous it really is, and the amount of effort and money that people are actually spending sometimes in these situations personally shocks me. So
Yeah.
It's
Trust
there
me.
are
yeah.
people who leave, and it's sad seeing that. It's hard because of they're like coming where specifically where I went away from sometimes, and
Yeah.
my presence contradicts their thing in some situations. So I don't mean to say that they don't have reason to leave, because they do. Everybody who believes they need to be somewhere else and their family's better off somewhere else, like that, it's true. At that point, it doesn't really matter, like, if the fear is because of, like, let's say a marketing campaign or propaganda or something blown out of proportion, or if it's like because they saw somebody get shot, they saw a relative die. And I can say that when I've interacted with people here who were living in Nicaragua, I've met many people from all over the world, also people from El Salvador, Honduras, who left violence to live here. So I don't know about the statistics, but that's happened. I've met people like that while being here. That seems to be a theme of sorts. People are able to come here and live more peacefully.
Yeah.
Well,
As an
not everyone.
employer here, I
Some
have a
people.
lot of employees who are doing fine because they're employed and they're able to afford houses and they're safe. But they get this, you could be rich if you come to the US. And so many are like, I gotta go. I got an opportunity. I'm gonna pay. And I've had people come to me and be like, we're gonna put up our business as collateral. Will you loan us $10,000, $20,000 so we can pay to send someone to the US? Because they'll be wealthy once they arrive and they'll pay everything back. And of course, that's not how it works. But there's so much marketing to
Mhm.
Nicaraguans to convince
Mhm.
them that no matter what, and it's especially targeting the ones who are doing well in Nicaragua, not super well, but the ones who are employed and putting food on the table and doing okay. They're like, but you could save up and then magically be wealthy. And there's so little information from the United States because it's just drowned out. Right, Hollywood is producing stuff. The U.S. government is producing stuff. They are bombarding Nicaraguans with it's a panacea. It is the promised land. All you have to do is sneak
Mhm.
over the border. And every Nicaraguan I speak to who's ever considered it says the same thing. Oh, no, I don't have to go in illegally. I will be welcomed in. I will be automatically taken care of. I will be given a job and I will be wealthy. I'll have a car. I'll have a beautiful place. All these great things that obviously are not true. But when Nicaraguans can't travel, which most Nicaraguans can't, they can't even go to Costa Rica getting a visa to go to any place except the CA4. It's very difficult for Nicaraguans, very expensive. And so Nicaraguans generally haven't been to other countries. And so what they see on television from American media is so much volume and it's so beyond their dreams of how could anyone be so rich. They don't realize that Americans also watch American TV and laugh about, obviously it's not like that. You watch Friends, you're like, okay, that's a $10 million apartment. Like, obviously no one in New York City lives like that. I was a Wall Street executive for a long time in New York City, and I lived in a 1-bedroom little itty bitty apartment. It was fine, but it was nothing like that. I could not possibly. I had to be the president of the bank to be able to afford the Friends apartment, right? So they're looking at these things and they're so convinced that even when they're doing well here, they will give up anything because they're certain that getting there will be um, this magic thing. And then once they get there, it's too late. And so I know tons of people who have managed to come back immediately. They immediately were like, "Oh, I lost everything, but at least I got to go back home." And I know others who are trapped because they can't afford to come back, and that's what the U.S. wants: is people who are trapped and have to work for whatever they'll take because they have no choice.
It does work
And
for
it's
some
worth
people.
mentioning
I just
the
want to say that because I also
Mhm.
agree with you completely, Scott. That's been my experience personally. But I understand that, like, logically, there must be people I don't know who have a genuinely good experience and are able to get, because I I think that the propaganda matters more for in a subconscious way. Why people actually are leaving is because, like, a family member of a family member, it worked, and that's all it takes. Like, once somebody really knows that one person had a better life, they feel so unhappy, and a lot of the times it's not forces necessarily unique to Nicaragua that they're unhappy about. At least, I, coming from the United States, I saw a lot of people addicted to drugs, fucking their lives up with prescription pills, drinking, all sorts of things that is just socially acceptable or it's okay. Whereas here, when people have issues, it's like we target their culture. But for some reason, when we have our, I guess 'cause we don't really see our own issues. Maybe that's probably just a normal
Yeah.
thing.
If you move to Spain, they immediately say that they're fearful of Americans and Brits coming in because of the drug culture and that stuff. So it's other places like Europe do see it. I just want to real quickly say, as an anecdote, and this is awful, but the producer of my YouTube show, Marcella, that if anybody watches it, you see her on a bit. There's a well-known story of Nicaraguans who went to the United States, and the guy couldn't find work, and he wanted to send a little bit of money back home to Nicaragua for his kids, and he took a job painting a wall because he didn't know what was dangerous, and the people had taken advantage of his ignorance and paid him to paint over gang signs, and he was killed for taking a minimum wage painting job for an afternoon, and that was a friend of my producer's. In the U.S., had gone to the U.S. for that job. So, very, it hits home that we know people directly affected by how awful the move north can be.
One thing I want to mix it up and I guess something a little lighter to talk about is I want to talk about the nature and the just environment, the natural landscape that you guys find yourselves in, because I think for Americans and Canadians moving down, that'll be one of the biggest adjustments and shocks and sources of enjoyment as well, is just how different the nature is. And I'm, Nicaragua has different atmospheric zones and conditions, whether you're in the beaches or the mountain or whatever, but it's different. There's mango trees, there's coffee. Maybe you guys could talk about some of your experiences.
I think so. I think I was actually just before the podcast. I was collecting mangoes off the road. It's a bit of a late season actually because we had a very dry summer, so the mangoes actually have been taking a bit longer to become mature. Because I prefer a yellow mango, like a really soft one, whereas actually most Nicaraguans they prefer
That's how you
green
tell the
mango, and
difference between a
yeah,
foreigner and a Nicaraguan.
yeah,
This is what
yeah.
they
Because
eat
in
mango.
Canada, like in Canada, we will kill for a yellow mango, but here they love them green. They like them sour. They like eating them with a bit of hot sauce or vinegar in a bag. But yeah, I like to pick myself up some nice yellow mangoes off the road. So those are dropping, and that's what I really love about living here. Is just because like on my own little small property here, like I have multiple different edible plants, fruit trees. I have a constant flow of young coconuts coming off. So like that, in terms of that kind of stuff, it's like really helped me kind of like every morning I reflect on my life here in Nicaragua, and like my life has changed. My outlook on life has changed. My outlook on community has changed. And that's yeah. So that is my thing, and I'm also a big fan of going up to the Campo. Those highland areas in northern highlands around Esteli, Jinotega, Matagalpa. I like to go up there, at least every month or two, because I have a couple friends that run eco resorts in the Campo, they call it. And for me, like that's the best life. I'm in Managua, have Nicaraguan family. They have to be close to their family members, but I try to spend as much as my time up in the mountains. I'm not so much a beach guy, but I like to go there. But when I'm at my friend's house, him and I were running around at night in the backyard, watching sloths, that kind of stuff, like all the nature and stuff. Drinking coffee that was produced on that area, and we had just roasted it about 10 minutes earlier. Having fresh cacao, having fresh coconuts, all that stuff is like, it's really changed my life. It's made me a much happier and healthier person, right? Especially coming from that North American diet. It's like I eat organic here at a fraction of the cost, and like really often it's free.
I think the climate affects so many things down in this part of the world. I was originally from Canada as well, and growing up in a farming community, and this was in the prairies in Canada. So in central Canada, it gets very, very cold in winter and very hot in summer. But we had 4 or 5 months of growing season, and that was it, right? So our culture was changed by it, right? We were taught that during that time, you better work really hard because you got to save up enough food to survive the year. Whereas when you're in a tropical culture, bananas and papayas and mangoes are growing, all season long, and different things at different times of year. And then, the ocean's right there, so you can go catch some fish. So everybody and their dog has a chicken, right? So there's always kind of food around. If you're able to always kind of think about, or not have to think about, how am I going to eat tomorrow, it tends to change the culture, right? It slows everything down. You don't think about, there's not a lot of villagers in Nicaragua that have bank accounts with large savings amounts, right? They're not thinking about that. They're thinking about, oh, tomorrow, if I don't catch a fish, I guess I'll just have some bananas or something.
Yeah.
But it makes for a much more relaxed, tranquilo way of life, right? It's one of the great things about it. But to your point, Vance, is it's also one of the most frustrating things for first world country people to come into and go, God, everything moves so slowly here. I brought my car in to get, the air conditioner repaired, and it's been a week and a half, and they still haven't gotten to it, and all those sorts of things. So the two things that we encounter a lot with in building the communities is people have to kind of, get acclimatized to the climate. First of all, it's hot, and if you're used to, a more spring-like climate all the time, it takes a while to adjust. I find it takes 6 weeks to 8 weeks to kind of go, okay, 30 degrees doesn't feel so hot anymore, 30 Celsius, right? So but then you're the next thing they're dealing with is that stuff moves slower. Now, so if you can get used to that, it's great. Your whole life you're not in the rat race. My life before coming down to this part of the world was, was in the software business. It was basically the Silicon Valley world, where it's just go, 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 go. It's so much competition. Everything is all, you don't get more than an hour off a day to sleep, and then you go back. So this is like the polar opposite, but it takes a little while to adjust to, too. So, you just got to slow everything down. And there's this theory that around the world, like around the equator in Africa, around the equator here in Latin America, and different parts of the world, time slows down when you're in the tropics for that reason. And it sounds great, and the tranquilo lifestyle is great, but it does take a little bit of getting used to.
I've loved the nature here. For me personally, that's been like a big part of probably why I feel so fulfilled being here. Not just because there's beautiful stuff you can visit and look at, because that's definitely true. But in that sense, a lot of other countries also have beautiful scenes and vistas of volcanoes and these things. It's the tropics. That's pretty much what it's like here, not saying Nicaragua doesn't have unique things. There's things like Ometepe and that sort of thing. But for me personally, living in the US, I couldn't access nature. I was not a landowner. And the chance of me becoming a landowner, and it felt like I'm at the beach and there's these big waves, and everyone's like, if we just put our hands up all together, we'll stop these waves, And I'm just like, why the fuck are we doing this? And it doesn't feel valid, like a good way to live. Whereas here, like if I want to, for me, a thing I've been working on over the years is my relationship with food, because I think that food is a fundamental part of why intelligence forms. So you have to understand what being hungry and the food you're getting and the emotions behind all of that are intrinsically linked to our intelligence as humans. So food is a fundamental thing to have a very close relationship with. Otherwise, you're going to do other things that just get derailed because of your health or something, and you don't understand what you can do to fix it, because you've been, preaching what is told to you about what's healthy and all this, and really people are just stuffing poisons into us and getting rich off of it, and we're guzzling it down, and then they're like, oh no, this new poison, this one is healthy, yeah, and it's just more nonsense. Whereas here in Nicaragua, you can grow plants that make food, just like Patrick was saying, Patrick and Don. Wait, so it's George, not Jorge.
George, yeah, but down here it's Jorge.
I like that, Don George. I like the contradiction. It sounds cool. Yeah, it's like there's food, and there's this whole part of life and living that we've disconnected ourselves from, and we suffer because of it. And the care that goes into learning about like animals and plants and how we can use them as technologies to combine them with what we know, instead of ditching them and abandoning all of the things that made us what we are. Here in Nicaragua, I can afford this life. Like, things can go wrong, and it's okay. I can provide for myself and another person. Whereas in my own country, I can't afford anything, let alone helping another person. That's impossible. Like, literally, it's when I was there, those thoughts didn't even manifest because of the ridiculousness of providing for another soul. When I lived in Reston, Virginia. Okay, this is like it's an area that is very expensive, even by American standards. It's not like, super pricey, but it was expensive. The kind of place where $1,000 gets you a room in a neighborhood that might not be very nice. Not the kind of place you want to go out at night. I got mugged out there in the nighttime once. So I've had those kind of experiences in the United States, the safe place. And in some ways that made me behave differently. So I can't just say that means that was dangerous, and it's not here. But yeah, it's just been such an experience being here. So I'm glad to be able to interact with all of you and talk about this.
Hey, Vance, this is Patrick. I'm going to have to run. I apologize, but I had promised something else at this point. So.
Yeah, I probably extended things. I apologize.
Oh, no, not at all. But I've talked enough for you, I'm sure, Vance, by now. So I appreciate
Patrick.
I appreciate you having me on the program, and happy to always do that for you. I'm sorry I have to run at this point.
Yes, sir. Patrick Hiebert from Eco Villages.
Thanks, guys.
See you, Pat.
Cool, guys. I want to keep talking about animals at all. This is kind of random, but I've become way more attuned with birds, and like I'm always looking in the trees for birds, and I'm sure
Guarabarancos everywhere.
Yeah, I've got guarabarancos that live on in my garden. It's amazing to be out there at night and see them out there.
The first time you see one, it's amazing. But then, you sort of get used to it, right? But it is one of the most peculiar, most beautiful birds that you could ever imagine.
Okay, and I'm Googling it because I had to Google what is guardabaranco, but it's a mot-mot.
It's a mot-mot. Yeah, that's just the Nicaraguan term for it.
Yeah, because in Spanish it's mot-mot, right? But you guys have a local type.
Yeah, the guarabarancco.
There are lots of very. If you want to see lots of birds here, you just need to be near. If you're in the jungle, you'll get birds, but not okay, your house is the bird spot. What you want is a house that has a tree in an area where there aren't a whole lot of trees. So it's very obvious that that's the tree to go to. And you'll be marauded by birds. Like here in this house, I only know that because of the circumstance here. There's a lot more birds than anywhere I've lived here before. And I thought getting chickens would mean I would have less birds, but they just hang out. And now there's this pigeon that I swear it comes into the yard in the morning and it walks around like a chicken and it just hangs out with the chickens. And at first it was getting sticks and these things, but now it like thinks it's a chicken. I don't know what's going on, but the bird life here it's remarkable, and especially if you put the right circumstance up. And that's one of the thing about plants and permaculture. If you have any interest in permaculture or that notion, an easy way to think of it is you plant things to bring as many birds and butterflies and bees as possible. And like bees here are also a whole different world, because people in other countries pay to find these like stingless bee things. And otherwise they just have honeybees. But here there's honeybees, there's like loads of stingless bee varieties that I've seen, that I see every day of my life, that when I look online don't exist here. The cacao plant supposedly can only be pollinated by bees that exist in Mexico. Huh, yeah, those bees that exist in Mexico also are here. We just act like they're not for some reason.
Yeah, those little stingless bees. If you go really deep into the campo, you might find they have some people will actually have them living in a hanging log in their homes, and basically
Yeah,
they treat them
it's
as
a
pets.
medicine too. They
I
use it
have
for eye
Exactly.
drops in like rural areas,
Yeah, it's
that sort
medicine.
of thing.
I've got thousands of those bees just because I have a garden house, I have an estate, and so I've got big hikaros, and there's just so many birds and so many bees and so many things. Um, but we had so I talked to someone from the Department of the Environment, and we have the northernmost sighting in our yard of a Costa Rican porcupine um, species. They've never seen one north of southern Rivas before, and we
Better
had
keep
one
your
in our
dogs
yard.
away.
Our dogs found it, but it was way up in a tree. There's no way for them to get to it. But yeah, it was. We're like, "What are you
We
barking?" It
better
was the middle of
go.
the night, and we go out, we turn on all the lights. We're like, that's a porcupine," and it was like exactly this species that isn't supposed to be here. We've even up here in Leon, we've had sloths on the road. Like my taxi driver's like, "Yeah, one time I had to stop for a sloth on the road."
Or
Yeah, I've seen a
here
few
in
species
Managua,
like
there was a
that.
monkey that came into the yard. It was like someone's pet, I guess, because it had a purple collar. But it literally, like, it
Mm.
came into the yard and like went up the mango tree and was looking for mangoes. And I was like, "Man, you're fucked. There's not a single mango in that tree." He
Eh.
didn't care, and he left. There's a
Yep.
lot of wildlife
Here the
like that. I
squirrels
mean, sloths and these
are the
things. If
robbers.
you just go a bit out of the city, yeah, they look like they're on steroids. I'm used to like the American squirrels. They're like the little scrawny gray ones, right? But here, oh, they're
Hmm.
so big and buff. Like they look bizarre to me. Like they look muscular and strong. Whereas the ones well, maybe it's because I lived in a neighborhood and people would feed the squirrels peanuts and they were really fat. I know that sounds ridiculous, but literally the squirrels were bulbous. And I didn't even know that could happen. Like that could happen to squirrels, but it does because they hibernate and all these things. So seeing the ones here just fundamentally look different. It's interesting how the animal's culture is sort of different. And if the most obvious animal with that is cats, for me at least, cats here, they're more sort of like dogs. They eat more, they're less picky. They'll eat more different things. If you have some scraps at your meal, you can feed them to your cat. And it's kind of interesting how cats are here. And in some ways, I think that also reflects, it's like what the others were saying about the tropics and what that does about the people and the chillness. From my experience with people here, the chillness is more about the extreme heat in the afternoon. People, you just like, okay, I personally don't get that bothered by the hot, but I also lived in deserts. I lived in other places that were more extreme, and I chose to come live here. But I've heard locals complain about the heat a lot. Like that, definitely. It's very, very normal, especially in Managua. It's perceived as a very hot place as well. Um, so
Oh
it
yeah.
really is about people's experience. But that part of the afternoon that's hottest tends to, people tend to not work as much, to be slower, to go into the shade, to chill out or to kind of take a nap. So in some ways,
Siesta under a
that's probably,
tree.
yeah, part of it.
Yeah. In terms of pets and animals, like I probably would not have a pet. If I was back in Canada, in Vancouver, Toronto, whatever. Here, I just sometimes a street dog will show up at my house. I'll just take him in because taking in a dog here having pets in terms of the cost and the ease of it. It's just so simple. And also the veterinarian I go to, it's just this kind of roadside vet. I pick up the needles, I pick up all that stuff, and I'm not going to say I do my own veterinary work, but I kind of do my own veterinary work, because there's a lot of things, just giving them shots, giving them dewormings and stuff, like you pay 100 pesos and it's taken care of. In Canada you go to the vet and consultation costs minimal, $100, et cetera, et cetera. So that's another part I really love about Nicaragua, is I'm actually able to keep pets, and it's not a crazy expense. It's not something I need to pay another insurance for. It's like it just is what it is. And my cat runs wild, my dogs are free to roam, kind of thing. Like, it's just a totally different life when it comes to having pets and
I wasn't
animals that you
allowed to
own.
have chickens. Like, I couldn't afford to have chickens.
Yeah, try to have
That-
chickens in your
like, I feel like
backyard in the suburbs in the States or Canada.
yeah. I know this sounds crazy, but they get a shower. There's an extra shower in the house, and so that's their coop. I every morning I take the little one, because I have two regular Creole hens that lay eggs, and getting chickens. Holy shit! If you want to break your preconceptions about food and all that stuff, get some chickens and take care of them and see what they do. It's remarkable, and we really should be closer to chickens. It's a lot easier
Yeah,
here. It's
owning
less
chickens is the
regulated.
way.
You can just get animals. Like, you can literally just find it. If you go on Facebook, you're not supposed to be able to. Okay, they can't sell animals on Facebook, but what they do is they're like, here's this photo of an animal, here's my contact, don't say anything about buying. And that's how. And you can literally, things you can imagine. I've seen shocking things that people sell here, and there's a whole. That's the whole thing you don't really want to get into. But the really common things that people buy and sell. That's what I like interacting with, right? But you do have to be careful with the animals, because they're very, especially if they're being like. It's better to get an animal from somebody who like has an extra one versus an actual breeder, because if you buy from a breeder, the animal's always going to be sold at its like ideal health point in its life, and it's going to hide any kind of disease that it has, and then when they don't sell it, they just kill it, and then they have more. It's really, you don't want to be supporting that kind of thing. But in my case, like, I wanted to get the Aztequitas, so I have no way of like vetting people, and you sort of have to be aware of that if you're getting animals, that like it's not regulated, and especially there's cultural like the treatment of chickens in Nicaragua culturally is rough, like really fucking rough. Just because there's like a part of the culture here, and I'm not dismissing it at all, but it's a blood sport, and they fight them, and they put like razor blades on the roosters and everything. And I don't think all that needs to go away or whatever. I personally find that those kind of things shocking, because I have hens as pets. The thought of putting razor blades on their talons so that they can kill each other is like, it's shocking to me, right? But for a lot of people here, it's not like that, and that's a part of their culture, and it's something to respect. But also, if you're engaged in taking care of animals, that means you need to get the animals, right? And so how are you going to get them? You got to buy them from someone, or you got to have them come to you, right? But let's say you want a cow. You think a cow is just going to come to you? Like, you're going to have to interact with this reality if you want to get any kind of animal into your life in a way that like works, and especially that people don't then steal that animal, because animals are inherently valuable. Like, you can, if you get a fancy dog, like, people can steal those little dogs. That's really common. I've heard of little dogs getting stolen. Like, that's a thing. People do that.
I
Like,
live in
people I know have
a
lost their
walled.
dogs literally because someone stole it in their camera. Not even like something else happened. Like, literally at night, somebody like cut open the fence and takes the dog, like tricks it, and then just takes it. Like, they target certain things. So you sort of have to figure out, how do you get animals that Nicaraguans like, but they aren't like, oh, that's different. That's something I could sell or whatever. So there's these chickens, these little chickens. Here they call them miniaturas or aztequitas, and they're bantam chickens, basically. But I strongly encourage anybody who comes to Nicaragua and lives here and has a garden that is walled, right? You got a house, there's those big concrete walls. As long as you have that, you can have astequitas in your garden, and they eat very little. They'll eat eggs sometimes, but having a pair, like a little rooster and a little hen, it is remarkable. They show you, so they shock you with the way they behave. I know that sounds dramatic, but the way the rooster takes care of the hen, and the way the hen looks for nests and makes new spots and gets distraught about her eggs, it's a whole process that's really incredible. There's no way I could really experience where I was from before. So to go back to the animals point again, it's incredible, like the plant thing, but with the animal thing, you have to be more careful. Whereas with the plants, as long as you're not trying to like do something agriculturally without a permit or something, because it's pretty regulated agriculturally here. You might think it's not, but it's a big sector. It's if you have a decent amount of land agriculturally, that's very regulated in Nicaragua. Whereas if you're just like operating on some little plot and doing whatever, it like doesn't really matter what you're doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool, guys. Do you want to wrap it up there?
Sounds good.
Let's do it. Well, this has been the Nicaragua Roundtable for esteemed guests. We had on Patrick Hiebert from Eco Villages, Don Jorge, find him on X, Jack Pitman, YouTube, and Scott Allen Miller. Check him out on YouTube as well. All the links will be in the show notes. Wherever you're listening to this podcast, maybe it's Apple, Spotify, YouTube, X, wherever you're listening, please subscribe. We put out 2 episodes a week. You won't want to miss anything. Thanks, guys. Again, thank you, the audience, for listening. Ciao for now. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Bit Refill. Bit Refill is the best way to spend your crypto in Latin America. Purchase gift cards or mobile refills from more than 3,500 brands in 186 countries instantly, safely, and privately. Visit bitrefill.com for more information. This episode of the My Latin Life podcast is brought to you in part by Job Stacking. Introducing Rolf Haltza's Paycheck Multiplication Layering Method, a revolutionary approach that redefines the traditional career path. This is Rolf's new Done With You program, where he'll work with you to implement job stacking for yourself. With this method, Rolf contractually guarantees that you'll be able to double your income in 45 days. So, are you ready to step out of the shadows of job insecurity and step into a world of career abundance? Then just click the link in the description of this episode, book a call with Rolf, and start walking the path of unleashing your earning potential with job stacking.